Hello, I am Lashina Jenkins, and I am here to do a video about the recent battle between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. Now, for those of you who don't know me, and you probably won't, because on this video, on this particular channel, this is my first video. And so excuse all of the faces. I overthought all of the things about how to present this video, and it boiled down to just do it. And so I wanted to share some thoughts that I had. So I could just do the video and then share kind of my credentials, or if that's important to y'all, about why this is important to me, why I'm taking this particular angle, and yeah, and why it's so important for women. And so I've heard and seen so many of the think pieces and the analysis on this beef, hip hop beef. And I think, and one thing that I have not heard is this particular perspective, and it is the perspective that directly speaks to the experiences of women and children. And given my work that I do, so I do work around advocacy, activism, um, healing, and particularly self-expression for this purpose of healing. And so this is going to be an important conversation for me because I'm going to let you know a little bit more about who I am and what I do, and then also invite you into thinking a little bit deeper about another way to look at these beefs and these wars, if you will. So what the Kendrick and Drake beef exposed, based on what many of mainstream media is discussing, is the dangers of beef, the challenges of the Black community being so attached to and committed to and invested in the outcomes of the beef, even invested in the words. I've seen so many YouTubers breaking down the language, breaking down the choices of metaphors, and specifically, and this is what this video is about, I thought it was really important to celebrate the Black community, and especially men in general. We hear so much in this landscape about men not being protective of women and not being open to the challenges and the struggles that women face, even when it comes to matters of the home. And this beef, or this occurrence in hip hop, was really eye-opening. And what I hope it is, and what I'm hoping to draw from a few different sources, excuse me, for the purpose of this video, is to celebrate the men that did go this route, and specifically celebrate Kendrick. And so I think it's important for us to first identify that Kendrick's approach to this beef, while it might have been a campaign, right? I've heard so many words about how this was about him, you know, going up against the industry, and this was about him taking a stance and really stepping out, right? He said it in his own words, right? Sometimes you got to step out and show them. And I think that that was important because he was just speaking from his own, right, volition. He was just really naming that he was lyrically more dominant than Drake. And so specifically on this video, his campaign to identify Drake as, I've heard some of our YouTubers use the phrasing of a PDF. And so we'll go with that, a PDF. And I think that using that term, also because I'm not familiar with all of the bells and whistles of YouTube and what it is that they don't want you to say. And so I want to honor that and make it so that you can get the most out of this video as possible. And so if you're not familiar with the beef, if you're not familiar with what I'm saying when I say PDF, or what we would also call a PD file, then take a look at some of the other videos that talk about a little bit in depth the journey that we've been on with these two performers and what that invited us into in dialogue about not only the craft, but also the culture of hip hop. And then what I'm going to address here is the art of war. And historically, what we found is that when men go to war, the casualties typically end up being women and children. That is pretty consistent across the board, both in the broader global world, the global economy, the global ecosystem of wars. We've seen that women and children have historically been the casualties of those wars. They are the ones not fighting, but they are either succumb to, you know, death or unaliving. Let's do that. Unaliving, or they're also become victims of war crimes. I think that's the better way to put it. They're the victims of war crime. And so this war that happened between Kendrick and Drake ends up being a redefinition in true 2024 fashion, a redefinition of war, both a truth telling as well as a redefinition of war. And so we get to see someone who is known for the industry in this time, right? Who knows how long this video might live on the internet. In this time, we see that when men go to war, women and children become casualties of that war. They either become attacked, right? Right, just crimes of war. And so rather it's historically when we're thinking about, what's happening in the Congo, if we think about what's happening in Gaza, if we think about what's happening in Ukraine, all across the world, there are many wars taking place. And what the consistency is that still women and children become the casualties of that war. The same is true for the Bible. And so, yes, we're going there too. If you and for this evening's talk, because I believe it'll be multiple, I want to speak directly to the women, especially in the Bible, who benefit from Kendrick taking the stance that he did, running the campaign that he did during this beef. And so we're going to start with the book of Judges, and it's going to be Judges 21. And I'll just set the stage for you without reading the entire thing, although maybe I'll edit this out and kind of put it into text form. And so during this text, there is a Levite. A Levite is known as a priest or a religious leader. There is a religious leader who has taken for himself a concubine. And theologians would say that the concubine was wife number 2. So he'd already had another wife. Historically, in the Bible days and Bible times, concubines were typically younger than 18. And so already we can see a parallel in history. So thinking back again to Kendrick, who says, just bear with me for a second and let me put you on game. If historically we've always seen that women or girls became women as soon as someone desired them as a wife, then we can see how times have not changed as much as we would like to think that they have. For Kendrick to still need to make a song to let people know that they are not like us, that PDFs are still running rampant, and that we as a community need to continue being vigilant in calling them out and in separating them. Now, in separating them, I think that's a good way to say that, because even if the intention, right, if we are speaking from a Christian standpoint, if the intention is to reconcile them back into their communities, even God would desire a consecration. Even God would desire a separation, a sanctification process for that type of sin, because it does harm the community. And detrimentally, tragically. And so to separate them completely and then help them deal would be best for the community as a whole. And so what Kendrick is calling out is the importance for us to continue taking that seriously. Even today, Kendrick's one of his lyrics says, you better not ever go to cell block 1. Right. And in that way, he's referencing a common kind of unspoken rule about PDFs, or people who cause harm to children. Another YouTuber, and I would love to start in my mind when I thought about making these videos, I was thinking about like listing some of these people out, because some of y'all deserve a whole lot of credit for the ways in which you have been intentionally helping people understand what was going on and why this was important. And so to say you never go, you better not ever go to cell block 1. There is a street code around, and I said street code, and I would add to that strict code among men. And then based off of these YouTubers, a street code among Black men about PDFs, about those who cause harm to children, to women, and to, or I guess women, right? Children, women, and the elderly. That is so important. And I did not want to miss the opportunity to highlight that, because I think that that is a very important change, a very important shift that Kendrick took in this battle, in something, in a platform as huge as hip hop, where, as he said, right, where we have been demeaning women, and we have been devaluing women, degrading women. He even, one of the things he even calls out is, you better not even mention Serena's name. And in that context, we're talking about Serena Williams. What I love about that is we think about the history of violence towards Black women, right? The idea was, say her name. So we're thinking about Sandra Bland, we're thinking about Breonna Taylor, we're thinking about say her name. And so for Kendrick to say her name, he was also upholding her in such a way, upholding Serena Williams, upholding her in such a way that would say to Drake, you will not only not degrade this woman right here, we are protecting her. She is worthy of not only her name being mentioned by somebody who honors and respects her, but she's also worthy of you not putting your mouth on her again. Right. And so I love that for us, because we have a lot of women, I think, especially when we're talking about dating, right? And I'll get to the text in a minute. Especially when we talk about dating, we've seen so many women speak either indirectly or directly about the violence that they've experienced at the hands of men. And whether that was when they were a child or when they were adults, we continue to see this play out in the way that our relationships in our households and the statistics around our marriages, how they flourish or don't. And so this is why, another reason why this was so important for me to capture this moment in time about men protecting us, about Black men protecting us, and protecting us not only from an individual who, at this point, the reports are just flooding in about, Drake's happenings, but they're protecting us in upholding. Kendrick has led an anthem in protecting us and our children. And that is worth pausing for. That is worth, if you've spent any amount of time feeling some type of way, or feeling resentful towards, or just angry with the state of the Black community, and particularly the leadership of our Black men, this feels like a time to stop and appreciate them for allowing this to be an anthem, allowing this conversation, this campaign that Kendrick went on, not only against an individual, but against an industry, which we have seen is showing signs that it has a culture, a secret culture that we're not aware of, that might be causing more harm to our communities than good. And so I'm excited in this moment in time for our men to be standing tall for us, to be calling out evil for us, and to be doing it with such anger and swag without us having to even be involved. And so if you are listening to anyone who seems to be on the side of Kendrick, or who seems to at least appreciate the dialogue, and I'm not blowing past the fact that Kendrick was named as, someone who was engaged in domestic violence. Now, I've seen two interviews where he speaks directly to them and he denies those claims. And we weren't there, so we don't specifically know. But what we do know is that he addressed it. And where Drake would have had the opportunity to address it, he did not. And so I think that, again, this is just a good opportunity without putting too much weight on Drake as a human being, but more so Drake being representative of what at least 1 in 3 women can put a face on and say, I know somebody like that. I like the idea that men have stood up for us in this way. And so I'm going to dive into Judges. And Judges specifically, again, Judges is about a Levite. A Levite grabs a concubine wife. She's most likely under the age of 18. She moves in with him, and this starts in Judges 19. She moves in with him. Judges 19. Judges 19. Let me see. Yeah, it should be Judges 19. Yep, it's Judges 19. So it starts at Judges 19 and 1. And so the first off, this is the first time that a family is fighting against each other. This is the children of Israel fighting against the children of Israel. So I think that's important too. Not only is this a war, this is a war that's in-house. And so as the Levite is living with this, the Levite has taken this concubine to be his wife, second wife in his house. They live together for some time, and then and even the text, right? And I believe this is this might be an NIV book. I'm reading out of. I'm reading out of the Life Application Study Bible. I'm just trying to see which is the NIV. And so they call her the girl's father. So now we already know, right? I want to be careful and not blame men, but men through time, even beyond this point, right? Even beyond this point. And we would say that Judges was written. I'm going to give y'all a little bit more context just so that you can understand where I'm going with this. All right. So if Judges was written, and I'm going to slow down because I knew that I would be doing this online where I would be flipping through the pages. So just bear with me. I know yeah. And so Samuel, anointed King David, Gideon, Deborah. So if this would have been right around the time of 12th century BC, right? 12th century BC, that this would have been written. 12th century BC, where girls were deemed old enough to get married or old enough to be somebody's concubine, which is basically like a housemaid, house slave, right? She can be used for whatever he needed her for. He needed another girl body for. It could be for having children. It could be for cleaning the house. It could be for his own pleasure. That is what her father sold her for. And so the Levite takes the concubine, puts her into his house. Enter his house, they're staying there just for a little bit, and then eventually she runs away from home. She runs away from home back to her father's house. We could dive into that. A lot of scholars have a lot to say about why she ran away from home. I think that's a good question of why she ran away from home. Maybe in another video, we'll get into that. So she runs away from home, and he goes back to get her. When he goes back to get her, they come back, and they are confronted with a group of men, a large mob. The mob basically demands like for the Levite to dishonor himself for them. And he says, how about you just take my concubine instead? They take the concubine, they torture her, and in all the ways that you could think of a woman being tortured through the night, and then leave her on his doorstep. Yes, that's in the Bible, in case you didn't know. And so he then, once he opens the door and realizes she's unconscious, it isn't clear about whether she was actually deceased or not. But he then proceeds to dismember her body and send it out to the 12 tribes of Israel, or it would technically be like 11 if it wasn't going to the Benjamites, because the Benjamites are the one that did this. And so he sends out he sends out these body parts. The people come back in and they say, oh no, look at what's happening here. Look at the torture of this woman. So here we are naming again the issue of a community recognizing it's not okay for you to treat a woman this way. It's not okay for you to treat a girl this way. Now, my biggest issue with this text in general was that they never addressed the Levite, who, again, we don't know if she was unalived yet. We just know that she was unconscious from her injuries the night before. And additionally, there was no proper burial because he dismembered her. And so that was unjust and did not get dealt with. Now, let's get back on topic. So if the tribes of Israel come in and say, oh no, this is war, this is unacceptable behavior. After they have this war where they're fighting each other, eventually they come to they basically, demolish most of the Benjamites. And then here's where it picks up, chapter 21 and verse 10. This is what you are to do, they said. And who is they? So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, right? And this is where the Benjamites are living, including the women and children. This is a genocide. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. So who were they keeping if the women aren't a virgin? Now, granted, back in that time, it was a little different than it is today. But again, women and children being casualties of war. And so the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared. But there were not enough of them. So the people grieved for Benjamin because they wanted to keep that lineage going, because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. And then I'm going to skip down to, where'd you go? Daughters as wives, since we just have taken this oath. Here it is. When the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, then rush from the vineyards and each of you seize a wife from the girls of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. Now, I think this is good to stop because, again, once I dive more into this, I'm hoping that you're already beginning to see how what Kendrick did was so new, and it was so important, and it was so needed as a reset for men. And that's why I think it's important for us to seize this moment and to celebrate men for acknowledging what we already know is not okay. It's just that when men get involved in ego trips, man mathing, I like to call it, they don't see the human aspect of these wars, because all they're thinking about is their respect. All they're thinking about is their honor, how their legacies, how they will be remembered, their competitiveness, who's going to be the winner. And so we can unpack how this looks like in so many different forms of war. But what still reigns true is that historically and biblically, women and children are typically, statistically, and currently the casualties of any war between men. And what Kendrick did with hip hop was put the morale back into it. He put morals back into the human experience. He brought everybody back to the table, men, women, and children, and honored all of our experiences by pointing at the real culprit, the real war, and that is systems and institutions that would seek to dehumanize us for their own benefits, for their own legacies, for their own competitive gains. And that is worth pausing and celebrating our brother Kendrick for. And so they aren't like us. They aren't like us. And I think that says it's such a powerful statement about them not being like us. And so I'm committing to jumping into this study deeper and identifying so many of the stories, especially in the Bible, but also in life, where we can see a lot of women needed this song. And this song has the opportunity, if we pay attention and if we encourage our men and our boys to see the real life attached to it, we can see a shift in the way that we treat each other and the way that we love one another, and potentially even heal some of the hurts and the harms and the damage that's been caused by women who might have thought that if you hung out with people who said things such as engaged in domestic violence, such as engaged in PDF, that if you didn't maybe do it yourself, you at least wasn't willing to stand up to the culprit and call him out and tell him that it's not okay, let alone alienate him, and then create an anthem that calls it out. And that is what I'm celebrating. That was worth me figuring out how to put this video up so that I can make sure that this goes under all of the conversation about the great things that Kendrick added to this moment in time, and celebrating him for not only calling it out, not only encouraging everyone else to remember that this is not okay, and creating an anthem around it. And so thank you for your time, and till the next video. Bye.